I want to talk to you about what we in Europe could learn from you and from the city of Singapore, politically especially. Um, you told me a long time ago that you have been able to talk the city over into um, adding new legislation into what you call the green plot ratio. So tell me more about that, please.
You go, man, Summ.
Oh, you go, Richard.
Well, I mean, when you say we talk them into it, it maybe sounds a little bit too much like a straight up, like we had a conversation and they enacted some legislation. I think it's been a long, ongoing conversation, and wasn't something they were necessarily against, I guess. But it's been a good conversation where our projects push the envelope forward. And when we come up against a regulatory roadblock, we say, hey, this is a good idea, but we actually can't do it. And then maybe a year or two later, the regulation gets amended. It starts a study of it. It's obviously at the beginning, it was quite divergent. So we did a scheme in around year 2000 for a high-rise housing project with gardens throughout. And I think they really liked our scheme, but it was actually not permitted under the regulations. So that probably started the process. And then it's now been 20 years since, so it hasn't been fast. But I think it's now, a matter of more of maybe now we're looking into things like sustainability and feeding back on things like area for solar panels or mixed panels and agriculture, for instance, like how that is counted as floor area.
So, what did happen in the last 20 years in the city of Singapore for a developer? What would they have to adhere to?
So originally it was anything that was green was considered floor area. And obviously that was terribly off-putting for them to put saleable area, because in Singapore they limit the amount of area you can build as one of the planning controls. And so no one would put that into garden if they could put it into an apartment, for instance. So I think the number one decision was that these common sky gardens are not considered floor area, and therefore they become a different calculation for the developer. It's like, do I want to build this for lifestyle and marketing and branding or sustainability reasons? It's not impacting my feasibility in terms of the number of units I can build.
But it's still construction area, and it's still construction costs. So like all policies, the government has to incentivize developers to do it, to gain a certain momentum. But I think when they starting to see that that the developers are finding it useful and all that, they will then start to remove the incentives. And I think that's and I think in some ways the URA here has been pushing this agenda. And I think after we have demonstrated with our building in Newton Suites, the government was very convinced that it was a good thing, and that any our developer UOL was happy to build them. They were confident that they can push the regulations to make it 100% green replacement. And that was in which year was that, Richard? 2005 or 2007, around that area, that time. And that was for all the developments in near the central area. And then I think 5 to 8 years later, maybe 2010, I think they went a little further after seeing that there was it was taking a good foothold in the city, and developers were happy to do it. They made it compulsory for all developments in Singapore, large-scale developments in Singapore, to have 100% green replacement. So, and I think now it's basically for all large projects, it is necessary for us to have 100% green replacement.
And what do normal commercial developers do to get to that 100%? What would they do? In which way would they follow these rules?
There are a few ways you can do it. You for one, you don't maximize the site coverage. Two is to roof up as much of the area with landscaping as well. And three, to create intermediate sky gardens to be able to multiply these green areas. And also, I think the government, through seeing the success of some of our projects with using green walls and all that, they have now, to a certain extent, allow a certain percentage to be counted in this green replacement as well, with vertical green walls. So there's a couple of ways in Singapore where we calculate the green plot ratio. With URA, they have a formula of surface areas. But with national park, they actually go by the leaf coverage, which is a different way of calculating it as well. So it's gone to a fairly mature and a slightly more complicated process of calculating green plot ratio for various departments now.
And did it make a measurable impact on the city climate?
I think this is something that makes it quite unique to Singapore. And I think if you come to Singapore, you can notice that Singapore has a different architecture and a different quality of buildings. And I think a lot of this has to do with the amount of integration with landscaping and high-rise greenery.
Yeah. Peter, in terms of measuring like a difference in climate, it's quite difficult, I think, because, you know, at the same time, energy consumption's going up, which eventually becomes heat in the city. But we're starting to study it in different ways. So, for instance, I think we've done a little study where if every building in a district was like Oasia, for instance, how much the temperature would drop by, which... Now I don't have the figure at the tip of my head, but it was like several degrees Celsius drop in temperature.
Actually, that's quite a lot. For the surface temperature of a facade, compared to a glass and granite facade, the facade in Oasia is half of that. Usually it's about 50 degrees Celsius for a glass and concrete facade. The green wall itself is only 25. So it's actually 50% less. So it's a substantial amount of reduction in the temperature of the building, also a substantial amount of reduction in the urban heat island effect as well. So it's fairly substantial. We are starting to have post-construction data, and this data are very meaningful and impactful for city planners.
And did you notice, for example, that after heavy rains, monsoon season is now, that it has been easier on the canalization of the city? For example, the water that has been kept by gardens?
Yeah. I think in one of our projects that we did, like Kampong Admiralty, we piloted a vertical phytoremediation, and also slowing the process of water coming down and then collecting it before it gets discharged beyond our site. And I think that is a very interesting one for us. It was the first time that we did it and sort of calculated and worked the technical details of it. And I think it makes a lot of sense to actually slow down the water and before it's discharged into outside the site. Just from the point of view of how built up the city is, that we can actually slow the discharge of water.
And the 60% ecosystem contribution, what does that mean?
That's the key one. But actually, what is quite interesting for ecosystem contribution is we for us, I think we did it in a way that is less technical and more architectural. We based it on a few things. Let me try and get it out.
It's not going to get our book since you're asking.
So the numbers are getting too complicated for us, but I think it's about how it's actually contribute towards the performance of the environment, oxygen filtration, pollution cleansing, and things like that. What is the actual definition, Richard?
Okay, so 60% is a development provides vertically and horizontally interconnected habitats, which including foraging territories. Provision is made for non-flying animals as well as birds and insects.
Great.
But actually, what is interesting here, Peter, is that this was an architectural rating that we came up with this book, which was what 2006 that we launched this. But what we have done we have assessed it with specialists now, with Oasia Hotel downtown. We have calculated the kind of ecosystem contribution services the building does. So what it actually means is that with all the almost 1,000% green replacement, the building performs like 1/3 of a lowland rainforest. That is quite impactful. So as if it's a piece of lowland rainforest on the site, it performs the services of it by 1/3. The impact here is that the building sits 100% on the site coverage. Even in a built-up environment, a building like ours can perform ecosystem services like a rainforest. If we did it 3 times of that, we would have achieved 100% of ecosystem services, which means built environment can also perform like rainforest as well. So the impact of this for city planning is quite impactful to know this data. So if we do want to say, hey, we want to maintain 100% ecosystem services, this is how much we have to build, how high we should build, what sort of plot ratio we should have, and how much mandating of integrated greenery we must have. So this is fairly impactful for city planners. And we have provided such data to our city planners. They are sort of working through the numbers and seeing how they could actually make sense of it in terms of city planning.
Yeah, thanks. That's exactly what we needed. And we see that some certain cities in the world are catching up. And I think it's Melbourne or Brisbane who are having this mandatory 30% as green now.
Very much thanks to Richard.
That's good. That's great. Yeah.
No, we've been doing some work in Brisbane, so they're referring to our book, and they've been studying what we're doing quite directly and asking us questions and things. So it's really good. I think that Brisbane is taking it on from a regulatory point of view.